chess video fans. This is Fishing Pole Praxis number 2, and today we're going to look at a game played in January of this year. Brian Wall with the black pieces and Sergei Pralyumov with the white pieces. Sergei is an international master, but he couldn't manage to find his way out of this attack, which actually is an unsound attack. And this points out an interesting aspect of the fishing pole attack is that black tends to get a very strong initiative, and psychologically it tends to throw players off, even strong players like international masters, especially at tight time controls. Now, if you're new to the series, you might want to check out the introductory videos, and I'll just remind everybody that we're talking about the fishing pole attack as a blitz weapon. Brian has played it in slow games successfully, but we're not going to get too hung up on accuracy. We're going to talk about practical chess and the power of the initiative. This game I selected because it features a slightly different plan from black, which I think is worthy of investigation. So anyway, we're going to assume that you have some familiarity with the basics of the fishing pole attack. You can refer to the other videos if anything seems unclear. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, re-Lopez. And here we have the Berlin defense, excuse me. And normally when we castle, if you want to go into the fishing pole, when white castles, excuse me, we play knight to g4. It's curious that at this vantage point you can either go into the incredibly insane fishing pole attack or the incredibly staid Berlin defense endgame, which is so beloved of the top international grandmasters. So you definitely have a choice in the Berlin variation. But here we're going to talk about fishing pole. So knight to g4, and as usual white plays h3, and equally as usual white plays h5. And not to belabor it, but if white at this point decides to take the knight, he loses because of an attack down the h file after queen to h4. So mostly games against higher rated players involve the higher rated player trying to figure out when the appropriate moment to capture on g4 comes. But it's not now. So in this game, Sergei played bishop takes c6, and if the d file were open, we would take back with the b pawn, but we usually want to take back with the d pawn. In this case we can do it because there will be no exchange of queens after we recapture. And this lets our bishop out, prepares queenside castling, and so on. Alright, d3. And now the normal fishing pole move here is bishop to c5, which I think is perfectly good. But Brian's idea is c5. And I asked him about this, and he wrote me and said, "Many of the lines that I play are not computer approved, but appeal to my aesthetics. I've had so many attacks fail to an open center that c5 appeals to me to lock it down. It's just an emotional thing, just to focus solely on my kingside attack. Fishing pole is always a wing attack, running out of time before the central play washes it away." It's an excellent comment. If you're curious about bishop to c5, I've analyzed this, and we'll probably show some games directly in this line. But central play immediately doesn't seem to do anything. If white plays d4 right off the bat, then we recapture. And if he decides to play c3 here, we could take on c3, and after the queen exchange, well, let's just look at the line briefly. Actually, not that one. If we look at this line instead, which is, I think, more logical, then after this series of moves here, the computer considers that white has a small edge. So better then taking on c3 is probably, we'll just back up here, I'm backing up. Better than c3 is probably d3. And in this position, after bishop f4, knight takes f2, rook takes f2, bishop takes f2, king takes f6, preparing pawn wave. Black is actually better, according to the computer. And some interesting play, a lot of play in the position. Okay, so there's no immediate fear of central play. So after bishop c5, d4 is probably not the best move. Perhaps c3 is stronger, and I'll try to find some lines where this has been played, because undoubtedly this has been played. For now, we're focusing on the alternative strategy from black, which is c5, restraining white's counterplay in the center before embarking on the wing attack. Okay, so in this position, Sergey played knight b to d2, which is sure the best move. And bishop to d6 was played, making a very solid center. And someday, this bishop may get to do something on this diagonal if e5 ever is dissolved. Sergey plays rook to e1, bishop to e6, logical developing move. And now Sergey has decided that it's time to take the knight on g4. And Brian states that this move is always a mistake, even when he loses, because when he goes back and analyzes it, he finds out that he missed some sort of resource that would have saved the game or won the game for him. So in this position, it's probably a mistake also. Actually, better than taking the knight would have been knight to c4, and if black manages to bungle the kingside attack, white is going to be better. It's not outright winning, but definitely knight c4 was much superior to taking the knight on g4. But that's not what happened, so let's look. We're dealing with practical chess here, not necessarily accurate chess. This is a blitz weapon, and this is a blitz game. And this is the kind of thing that will happen in your blitz games, too. H takes g4, h takes g4. And now, a fine defensive move from the international master, knight to h2. Now, the intent here is to play knight d to f1, and he's erecting a very strong defensive barrier. So, Brian Wall has been around the block a few times and decides that he'll play sacrifice of the rook here, well, sacrificing the exchange. Now he's going to be down a whole rook after the queen take. If we just back up a move, after knight to h2, the obvious move that would appeal to many players, the first move I looked at was queen to h4, but it's not sufficient, because after knight d to f1, castles queenside, queen to d2, rook to h5, intending on tripling on the h file, queen to e3, now we've tripled, and queen to g3, and white is holding on and is going to beat back the black attack, most likely. There are further complications here, but the computer seems to be quite comfortable that white is doing fine. So anyway, queen to h4 is premature. So black's move in this position was sacrificing the exchange. And this is one of these practical moves that perhaps maybe is not objectively best, but certainly hands black the initiative. Puts a lot of pressure on white. He really has to take. Queen to h4. And now black is really down a whole rook at this point. So he's going to have to be energetic in his play. Checks on h4. The king retreats to g1. And we castle queenside, which is a common theme in the fishing pole. And now white plays the defensive bishop to f1, knight to f1. and obviously this seems to be a strong move. However, c4 is also a possible move, intending to open the position for the bishops, which can cut off the escape route for the king. The computer also seems to like g6 with the intent of f4, f5, and a massive pawn avalanche down upon the white king. So there were other possibilities here. Rook to h8 certainly looks like it's going to give white some headaches. But white does not roll over easily. Plays knight to g3. And here, the obvious move again, queen to h2 check, is followed by king to f1, and he escapes. So this really doesn't lead too much for black. And so after knight to g3, c4 with the same idea in the previous note that I gave. The purpose of this is to open some scope for the bishops and cut off escape squares, preparing a mating net before coming in for the kill. And this is the mark of an experienced player. Just doesn't lunge for the first strong-looking check, but carefully prepares the attack. Okay, so after c4, white plays d4, playing d takes c4, bishop takes c4 would just be giving black everything he wants, so tries to block things up. And now, probably the objective best move in the position would be e takes d4. But Brian is single-minded in his determination to create a mating net, so he plays, somewhat surprising, c3. And now, of course, taking on c3 would be a disaster for reasons we've already talked about. And so b3 is played. So if you played something random, say like bishop to e3, queen h2 check, king to f1, and bishop to c4 leads to either checkmate or the loss of the queen. So b3 is practically one of the only, I think there was perhaps another move that white could have played, but he has limited choices here. So b3 stops bishop to c4. E takes d4 now. Queen takes d4. Bishop takes g3. F takes g3. Queen takes g3. Bishop to e3. And now rook to h2. And black's plan here is queen to h4 followed by rook to h1. It's a standard attacking idea, and it leads to checkmate, as the queen on h4 will still be covering the escape square on f2. So, of course, the international master is not stupid. He knows this idea too. So he plays rook to e2, pretty much the only move. And then queen to h4. King to f1 is forced, only move. And Brian takes a tempo out for defense because we have this queen and bishop battery looming down upon the black king. And so he takes a tempo for b6. And now bishop to g1 was played. And a good move from Brian, g3, because supposing he plays bishop takes h2 here, then g takes h2, and we're going to queen. However, in this position after g3, he should have played e5, and he's probably better. White is probably better in this position objectively. So, but he's under a lot of pressure here, and he plays instead after g3, like queen takes g7, and this is losing blunder. Okay, So now there's some inaccurate moves from both sides, but after this, it's pretty much over. Brian played queen to f4 check in this position, but much better was rook to h1, and now a series of only moves from white. Queen to d4, queen to f4, queen to e1 would be a mistake because c5, and its queen must maintain the defense of the bishop. Queen to e3, queen takes e3, rook takes e3, and this wins. So instead, what he should have done is give back after queen to f4. He should take on f2 with the rook, giving back the rook, and we get a position like this. These are pretty much forced moves. Queen to g5, a4, bishop to d5, and now white can't take on c3. If he plays rook to c3, he gets killed by queen to c1 check. So anyway, Brian missed a nice clean win here. He still ends up winning. So after the mistake, queen takes g7, he played queen to f4 check, played king to e1, and again he should have played rook to f2. This is his last chance, his very last chance, exploiting the inaccuracy of queen to f4 check. Rook to f2, and g takes f2, bishop takes f2, queen takes h2, and this is pretty much a draw. I believe the computer finds a forced draw here somehow, but I'm not going to bore you with that. Let's go back to what he actually played. Instead of rook to f2, he couldn't seem to accept the fact that he would have to return a rook to survive, and so he played king to e1, but this is now totally losing. And he played queen to g3 here, which loses very quickly, but he really had no choices. After rook to h1, his best move is queen to d4, bishop to g4, b4. This is to stop c5, as we'd seen in the other line. Queen to e5. He can't take this queen because of rook takes h2. Excuse me, rook takes g1. Checkmate. And see, this pawn on c3 is actually performing a useful function here. So he has to retreat, and now queen to e4. It's beautiful lines here. Only move. Queen to f5 check. Queen to e1. Queen to b5. Threatening all kinds of bad stuff here. King to f1. Only move. Bishop takes. Queen takes. And now rook takes. And this is forced, and we're up a queen and several pawns for a rook. This is going to be easy win. So back to the game. After rook to h1, he plays queen to g3, which is just suicide, and he missed the checkmate and won. All right. So again, the value of this game is showing this alternative strategy of locking down the center, and also the powers of the initiative and the psychological pressure that white is under in these fishing pole attacks that often results in them being unable to find the best moves. And as Brian said, that it's astonishing to him how many times second best moves from black's perspective still seem to end up winning just because of this psychological initiative. All right. Well, we're going to probably show a few more games in this line. I want to basically go to show 2 or 3 games in each of the main variations of the fishing pole. So we'll come back to this at some other point. I hope you enjoy this, and stay tuned for more installments. Thank you very much.